I never thought I'd be the type of mother-in-law who'd change the locks on her own vacation home, but life has a way of surprising you. It wasn't just about my kitchen being rearranged. It was about 30 years of boundaries being crossed, one spice rack at a time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the Michigan air carries the promise of the first frost. I was standing in my kitchen, my sanctuary, sipping coffee from the mug my late mother had given me years ago. The call came just as I was refilling my cup. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Claudia Jenkins from Lakeside Realty." I'd almost forgotten about the property assessment I'd requested months ago for Lake Haven Cottage. The family vacation home had been with us for 3 generations, passed down from my grandparents to my parents, and finally to me. My ex-husband Robert and I had spent summers there with our son Ethan, creating memories that sustained me through the difficult years after our divorce. "I've completed the evaluation, and I think you'll be quite pleased," Claudia continued. "The property value has tripled since your last assessment 15 years ago." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. "Tripled? Are you certain?" "Absolutely. Waterfront properties in Pine Ridge are at a premium now. We're looking at a valuation of $1, $2 million conservatively." The world seemed to shift under my feet. At 62, retired from my career as a school principal, I had been comfortable but not wealthy. My teacher's pension provided enough for my modest colonial house in Cedar Grove, but luxuries were few. This news changed everything. "If you're interested in selling, I already have several potential buyers," Claudia added. "I'll need to think about it," I replied, my mind already racing with possibilities. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, stunned. The cottage had been my personal retreat, my sanctuary away from the world. I'd maintained it through my divorce, paid the taxes even when money was tight, and lovingly restored its weathered features over the years. But $2 million would secure my retirement in ways I'd never imagined possible. My thoughts immediately turned to Ethan, my son. He and his wife Melissa had been struggling to put a down payment on a larger home now that they had 2 children, my grandchildren, Noah and Emma. Ethan worked long hours in marketing, and Melissa had built a promising career as an interior designer. They were good people, hardworking, but the housing market had been cruel to young families. I remembered how Robert had walked away from our marriage 20 years ago, leaving me to raise Ethan alone. How I'd worked extra jobs, saved every penny, sacrificed my own dreams to ensure Ethan could attend college without crushing debt. The memory still stung, but I'd made peace with it, proud of the man my son had become despite his father's absence. With newfound financial security on the horizon, I could help Ethan in ways I never thought possible. I could give Noah and Emma college funds. I could even take that European river cruise I'd been secretly dreaming about for decades. That evening, I called Ethan. "Mom, we were just talking about you," he said, the sound of children playing in the background. "We're planning to come visit this weekend. Is that okay?" "It's perfect," I replied, excitement bubbling in my voice. "I have wonderful news to share. I'm thinking of selling the cottage." A pause. "The cottage? But Mom, you love that place." "I do, but things change. We'll talk when you're here. I'm thinking about the future, all of our futures." We chatted about the children, his work, and Melissa's latest design project before hanging up. I spent the rest of the week in a state of anticipation, planning how I would tell them about my decision. I even called my friend Dorothy, Dot, as everyone called her, to share the news. "That's wonderful, Sarah," she said after I'd explained everything. "But are you sure about selling? That cottage has been your haven since the divorce." "I'm thinking practically now," I explained. "I can help Ethan and his family, secure my own retirement, and still have enough to enjoy life a little. Besides, the upkeep is becoming too much for me." just make sure you're doing this for the right reasons, Dot cautioned. Not just because you think it's what Ethan would want. I dismissed her concerns, too caught up in the possibilities that stretched before me. That weekend, I prepared Ethan's favorite meal, pot roast with rosemary potatoes, and baked apple pie for dessert. I set the dining room table with my good china, the set I'd carefully packed away when Robert left, too painful a reminder of our Sunday family dinners. They arrived Saturday afternoon, Noah rushing into my arms with stories of his soccer team, Emma shyly showing me her newest stuffed animal. Melissa brought a bouquet of autumn flowers, her smile warm as she embraced me. "The house smells amazing, Mom," Ethan said, hanging up their coats. Dinner was perfect. We laughed, shared stories, and for a moment, I felt that wonderful fullness that only comes from having family gathered around your table. After the children were settled in front of a movie, I brought coffee to the living room where Ethan and Melissa waited. "So, tell us about this cottage news," Ethan said, leaning forward. I explained everything, the unexpected valuation, my thoughts about selling, the financial security it would bring. "And I want to help you buy that house you've been looking at," I concluded. "A generous down payment would make it possible, and there would still be plenty for the children's college funds." Ethan's face lit up, but Melissa seemed contemplative. She glanced at Ethan before speaking. "That's incredibly generous, Sarah. But are you certain about selling the cottage? It's been in your family for generations." "I've given it a lot of thought," I assured her. "At my age, I need to be practical. The property requires maintenance I can't easily manage anymore. And honestly, I'd rather see the money benefit all of us while I'm alive to enjoy it." Ethan reached for my hand. "We appreciate this more than you know, Mom. But let's sleep on it, okay? It's a big decision." That night, I heard them talking, in hushed tones from the guest room, their voices occasionally rising before dropping again. I tried not to eavesdrop, but couldn't help catching fragments. Opportunity, and investment, and perfect timing. Sunday morning, over breakfast, Ethan broached the subject again. "Mom, we've been thinking about your offer. It's incredibly generous." He glanced at Melissa, who nodded encouragingly. "But we have a different proposal. What if, instead of selling the cottage, we renovate it? Make it more modern, more comfortable for you, and also a place we could all enjoy for years to come." I hesitated. Renovations are expensive, and the whole point was to free up the equity. "We could take out a home equity loan on the property," Melissa interjected, her designer's enthusiasm evident. "With the new valuation, we'd qualify for enough to make substantial improvements. Then we could rent it out during peak seasons through a management company. The rental income would more than cover the loan payments and give you extra income." I looked between them, confused by this unexpected counter-proposal. "But what about your down payment? The house you wanted?" Ethan shrugged. "We can wait a little longer. This makes more financial sense long-term. The property will only increase in value, especially after renovations." It wasn't what I had planned, but their enthusiasm was contagious. I found myself nodding, drawn into their vision of a modernized Lake Haven cottage that could remain in the family while still providing financial benefits. "We could start the renovations right away," Melissa continued. "I know excellent contractors, and I've been dying to redesign a lakefront property." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I suppose we could discuss it," I conceded, still trying to process this change in plans. They spent the rest of the morning showing me inspiration photos on Melissa's tablet. Modern kitchens with lakefront views, cozy but updated bedrooms, expanded decks for entertaining. By the time they left Sunday evening, I had tentatively agreed to their plan, though something about it left me uneasy. The following week, I received a call from Claudia Jenkins again. Sarah, I wanted to follow up on our conversation. I have a potential buyer who's very interested in viewing the property this weekend. They're prepared to make a competitive offer. I explained our new plan: keeping the property, renovating it, potentially renting it out. I see, Claudia replied, her tone measured. Well, that's certainly an option. Though I should mention that renovation costs often exceed initial estimates, especially for older properties. And the rental market can be unpredictable. Her cautionary words echoed my own buried doubts, but I pushed them aside. Thank you for your concern, but I think we're going to move forward with the renovation plan. My son and daughter-in-law are quite excited about it. After hanging up, I called Dot. They want to renovate instead of sell, I explained, detailing Ethan and Melissa's proposal. And what do you want, Sarah? Dot asked pointedly. I'm not entirely sure anymore. The idea of keeping the cottage in the family is appealing, and they seemed so enthusiastic. Just remember it's your property, your decision, Dot reminded me gently. Don't let yourself be rushed into anything. I assured her I wouldn't, but already the wheels were in motion. By Friday, Melissa had emailed me preliminary design plans. By the following Monday, she'd scheduled a contractor to visit the property. And by Wednesday, Ethan had called to discuss applying for the home equity loan. We'll need you to sign some paperwork, he explained. Nothing major, just authorization for the loan application. The property's in your name, so you'd be the primary borrower. But we'll make all the payments, of course. I agreed, swept along by their momentum and the promise of a beautifully renovated family retreat that would continue generating memories for generations to come. 2 weeks later, I drove up to Lake Haven Cottage with Ethan and Melissa to meet with the contractor. The autumn leaves had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, reflecting in the still waters of the lake. The cottage stood as it always had, its weathered gray siding and blue shutters familiar and comforting against the vibrant backdrop. As we walked through each room, the contractor made notes while Melissa animatedly described her vision. The more they talked, the more elaborate the plans became, knocking down walls to create an open floor plan, expanding the master bedroom, adding a loft space for the children, completely gutting the vintage kitchen I'd lovingly maintained over the years. We'll need to upgrade all the plumbing and electrical, the contractor said, making more notes. And the foundation needs work on the lakeside. I felt a growing knot in my stomach. How much are we talking about for all these changes? He glanced at his notes. Ballpark? Probably around $280,000 to $320,000? I nearly gasped. That's almost a third of the property's value. But it will increase the value substantially, Melissa assured me. And the rental potential will be much higher with modern amenities. As they continued discussing granite countertops and hardwood floors, I wandered out to the deck overlooking the lake. This place held so many memories. My father teaching, me to fish off the dock, my mother and I picking blackberries along the forest path, Ethan taking his first swimming lessons in the shallow cove. Even after the divorce, when money was tight and emotions raw, I'd brought Ethan here every summer, determined to maintain some normalcy in his disrupted life. Now, listening to Melissa and the contractor discussing tearing out the stone fireplace my grandfather had built, something shifted inside me. This wasn't preserving the cottage. It was erasing it, replacing my family's legacy with something sleek and impersonal. But hadn't I been ready to sell it just weeks ago? Was I being irrational? That evening, after the contractor left, we sat on the deck with glasses of wine, watching the sunset paint the lake in shimmering gold. Melissa scrolled through more design photos on her tablet, occasionally turning it toward me for approval. Ethan discussed rental rates for comparable properties, projecting income figures that seemed optimistically high. We should talk about the equity loan, Ethan said eventually. The bank needs some additional documentation from you. What sort of documentation? I asked. Just standard stuff. Proof of income, some information about your pension, maybe your investment statements. The more assets we can show, the better rate we'll get. Something in his casual tone set off warning bells. But I thought the loan would be based on the property's value, not my personal finances. It is, primarily, he assured me. But your credit profile still matters. It's just a formality. I nodded, but discomfort lingered. That night, as they slept in the guest room, I sat alone in the kitchen, running my fingers over the worn, wooden countertop my father had installed decades ago. By morning, I'd decided to slow things down, to take more time considering all options before committing to such an extensive renovation. I think we should wait until spring, I announced, over breakfast. Winter's coming, and construction costs will be lower after the snow melts. It gives us more time to fine-tune the plans. Melissa's smile faltered slightly. But we've already scheduled the contractor, and the sooner we start, the sooner we can get it listed for next summer's rental season. I understand, but I'm not comfortable rushing this, I replied firmly. It's a bigger project than I initially realized. Ethan and Melissa exchanged glances before he spoke. Mom, we're just trying to help. This renovation will increase the property's value substantially. It's an investment in all our futures. I know, and I appreciate that, but I need more time to think everything through. I stood up, signaling the end of the discussion. Now, why don't we take Noah and Emma down to the lake before we head back to Cedar Grove? It's a beautiful morning. They reluctantly agreed, and we spent a pleasant few hours skipping stones and showing the children the hidden cove where otters sometimes played. But the easy camaraderie of previous visits had been replaced by an underlying tension. On the drive back to Cedar Grove, I resolved to speak with my financial advisor before making any decisions. The cottage was my most valuable asset, and I needed objective advice about whether renovation or sale made more sense for my financial security. The following week, Melissa called to invite me to dinner at their townhouse. We haven't seen you since the cottage trip, she said. The kids miss their grandma. I agreed happily, missing my grandchildren and hoping the awkwardness from our last conversation had dissipated. When I arrived that Friday evening, the townhouse was filled with delicious aromas. Melissa had prepared an elaborate meal that rivaled any restaurant. This is wonderful, I said as we gathered around their dining table. What's the occasion? Can't we just pamper you a little? Ethan asked, pouring me a glass of expensive-looking wine. You've done so much for us over the years. The evening flowed pleasantly. The children shared stories from school. Melissa discussed her latest design client, and Ethan talked about a possible promotion at work. It wasn't until after the children were in bed that the conversation circled back to the cottage. I've been thinking about what you said, Melissa began carefully, about waiting until spring for the renovations, and you're absolutely right that we shouldn't rush. Relief washed over me. I'm glad you understand. I just need more time to... But, she continued, the contractor is willing to start with just the kitchen before winter sets in. It's the space that needs the most updating for modern rental appeal, and it can be done relatively quickly without disrupting the rest of the house. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. It makes sense, Mom. We can do the kitchen now, see how it turns out, and then decide about the rest of the renovations in spring. A kind of test run. I hesitated. The kitchen renovation seemed like a reasonable compromise, a way to move forward without committing to the entire project immediately. And truthfully, the kitchen's ancient appliances had been giving me trouble for years. I suppose the kitchen does need updating, I conceded. But let's keep it simple, okay? Nothing too extravagant. They beamed at me, and Melissa immediately pulled out her tablet to show me design options that, while modern, incorporated elements of rustic charm appropriate for a lakeside cottage. By dessert, I'd agreed to the kitchen renovation with work to begin the following month. We'll handle everything, Melissa assured me. You won't have to worry about a thing. As I drove home that night, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that we'd found a compromise, excitement about the kitchen upgrade, but also a lingering unease I couldn't quite name. I reminded myself that Ethan and Melissa were good people who wanted what was best for everyone. The renovation would increase the cottage's value while preserving it for future generations. It was a win-win solution. The following Saturday, I met with my financial advisor, Frank Garrison. I explained the situation, the unexpected property valuation, the renovation plans versus selling, the proposed equity loan. Frank listened carefully, making notes. The property's appreciation is certainly impressive, he acknowledged, but I have some concerns about taking on debt at this stage of your life, especially for a renovation of this scale. The rental income would cover the loan payments, I explained, repeating what Ethan had told me. Potentially, Frank agreed, but rental income can be inconsistent, especially for seasonal properties, and if something happened, a health issue, unexpected expenses, those loan payments would fall entirely on you, regardless of any informal arrangement with your son. His words gave me pause. What would you recommend? If you're determined to keep the property in the family, I'd suggest a more modest renovation funded from savings, not debt. Or consider selling a portion of the property to Ethan and Melissa directly, with a legal agreement about your continued use and eventual inheritance. I left his office with much to think about, resolved to discuss these alternative options with Ethan and Melissa. But before I could arrange another family dinner, events took an unexpected turn. 4 days later, I received a call from Helen Winters, a seasonal resident at Pine Ridge whose cottage neighbored mine. We weren't close, but we exchanged pleasantries whenever our visits overlapped. Sarah, I thought you should know there's been quite a bit of activity at your cottage this week, she said without preamble. Trucks coming and going, workers unloading materials. I assumed you'd authorized it, but when I didn't see you around, I became concerned. My heart raced. When did this start? Monday morning, bright and early. They've been at it every day. Since, quite a bit of demolition from the sounds of it. I thanked her for the information and immediately called Ethan. When he didn't answer, I tried Melissa. Oh, Sarah, she said, sounding distracted. Yes, we started on the kitchen. Remember, we discussed this at dinner? The contractor had an unexpected opening in his schedule, so we jumped on it. But we agreed to wait until next month, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. And I haven't even seen the final plans or signed anything for the loan. Ethan handled all that, she replied dismissively. We didn't want to bother you with paperwork. And the timing was too perfect to pass up. The contractor offered a discount if we started right away. I need to see what's happening, I said firmly. I'm driving up there today. There's really no need, Melissa assured me. It's just demolition at this stage, not very exciting. Why don't you wait until the weekend? We're heading up Friday night, and you can see the progress then. But I'd already grabbed my purse and keys. I'll call you when I arrive, I said, ending the call before she could protest further. The 2-hour drive to Lake Haven Cottage gave me plenty of time to process my growing anger and concern. They had started major construction without my final approval. They had apparently proceeded with loan paperwork without my knowledge. What else had they done behind my back? When I finally turned onto the gravel road leading to the cottage, my stomach dropped. 2 large dumpsters sat in the driveway, overflowing with debris. A pickup truck and a van bearing the logo Elite Renovations were parked haphazardly on the lawn. The front door stood open, and the sounds of hammering and power tools echoed across the normally peaceful property. I parked behind the van and walked quickly to the front door, stepping over piles of lumber and discarded materials. The noise grew louder as I entered, and dust hung in the air, making me cough. Following the sound, I made my way to the kitchen, or what remained of it. The sight stopped me cold. The entire room had been gutted. The beautiful oak cabinets my father had meticulously crafted were gone. The vintage farmhouse sink that had been the heart of countless family gatherings had been ripped out. Even the wide plank pine flooring, worn smooth by generations of footsteps, had been torn up, revealing the subfloor beneath. In place of the cozy, character-filled space I'd loved, there was nothing but stripped walls, exposed wiring, and dust. "Excuse me," I called to the nearest worker, my voice barely audible over the noise. "I'm the owner of this property. Who's in charge here?" He pointed to a tall man examining blueprints spread across a makeshift table in what used to be my dining room. I approached him, fury building with each step. "I'm Sarah Thompson," I said firmly. "This is my property, and I did not authorize this demolition." The man looked up, confusion crossing his face. "Ma'am, I have signed contracts and permits. Right here. Everything's in order." He shuffled through some papers. "Authorized by Ethan and Melissa Thompson, with power of attorney from Sarah Thompson." "Power of attorney?" I repeated, stunned. "I never granted anyone power of attorney over this property." He frowned, showing me the document. There indeed was my signature, or what appeared to be my signature, on a power of attorney form giving Ethan authority to make decisions regarding Lake Haven Cottage. My blood ran cold. The signature looked convincing, but I had never signed such a document. Never even seen it before this moment. "I need you to stop work immediately," I said, my voice shaking. "This authorization is fraudulent. I never signed this." The contractor looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I can't just stop in the middle of demolition. The structure is compromised. We've removed load-bearing elements that need to be replaced." "Then secure whatever is dangerous, but don't do anything further," I insisted. "I'm calling my attorney right now." I stepped outside, hands trembling as I dialed Frank Garrison's number. He answered on the third ring, and I explained the situation, as calmly as I could. "Don't confront Ethan and Melissa yet," he advised. "First, we need to verify whether a loan has actually been taken out in your name. I'll make some calls and get back to you. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos, get copies of whatever paperwork the contractor has, and get names of everyone involved." I followed his instructions, taking dozens of photos on my phone and collecting copies of all the documentation the contractor could provide. The more I saw, the worse it became. The simple kitchen renovation had expanded to include removing walls between the kitchen and living room, relocating the staircase, and extending the deck, far beyond what I had tentatively agreed to over dinner. As I was examining the plans, my phone rang. It was Frank. "Sarah, I've made some inquiries. There is indeed a home equity line of credit that was just approved on your property for $350,000. The funds were disbursed yesterday to an account at First Michigan Bank." My legs nearly gave out. "That's impossible. I never applied for any loan." "The application was submitted with your electronic signature," Frank continued gravely, "along with supporting documentation, tax returns, bank statements, everything needed for approval." "They forged my signature," I whispered, the full implications beginning to sink in. My own son forged my signature to take out a loan against my property. "We don't know that for certain yet," Frank cautioned. "But given what you've told me, it's a possibility we need to take seriously. I think you should contact the police." I couldn't bring myself to do that. Not yet. Instead, I called Ethan again. This time he answered. "Mom? Is everything okay?" "No, Ethan, everything is not okay," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm at the cottage. Would you like to explain why my kitchen has been demolished without my consent? Or why there's suddenly a $350,000 loan in my name that I never applied for?" A long pause. "Mom, we talked about this. The renovation, the loan. You agreed to everything. I agreed to consider a simple kitchen update next month, not this complete destruction, and I never ever signed loan documents or a power of attorney. Another pause. You're overreacting. We're just trying to help increase the property's value. It's for all our benefit. The work stops now, Ethan. Today, I'm serious. That's not possible, he replied, his voice hardening. We're under contract. There are penalties for cancellation, and the loan funds have already been disbursed. To an account I don't have access to? I pointed out. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? He sighed, exasperated. Mom, you're being dramatic. Melissa and I are handling everything. The cottage will be beautiful when it's done. More valuable, more comfortable for everyone. Why can't you just trust us? The conversation continued in circles, with Ethan alternately dismissing my concerns and trying to reassure me that everything was being done in my best interest. When I finally hung up, I felt hollow, betrayed in a way I never could have imagined. I stayed at the cottage that night, sleeping in the guest bedroom since my master bedroom had also been partially demolished. The next morning, I called a locksmith and had all the locks changed, then instructed the contractor to secure the property but cease all further work until legal matters were resolved. Back in Cedar Grove, I met with a lawyer specializing in fraud cases. The evidence was damning: forged signatures, unauthorized loans, misrepresentation to contractors. The lawyer advised me that these were serious offenses that could result in criminal charges. But the thought of seeing my own son arrested was unbearable, no matter what he'd done. Instead, we devised a different approach. First, I filed a fraud claim with the bank that had issued the loan, providing evidence that I had never authorized the application. Then, I transferred the deed of Lake Haven Cottage into an irrevocable trust with specific conditions. The property could never be sold or borrowed against without the unanimous consent of 3 independent trustees, none of whom were family members. Finally, I wrote a letter to Ethan and Melissa, detailing exactly what I had discovered and the actions I had taken. I explained that I would not be pressing criminal charges, but neither would I allow them access to Lake Haven Cottage again. The letter concluded with the simple statement, "Some betrayals cannot be forgiven." 3 days later, Ethan appeared at my door, his face haggard. "Mom, please, you have to understand. We were just trying to improve the property, make it better for everyone. We never meant to hurt you." I looked at my son, the baby I'd cradled through countless nights, the boy I'd raised alone after his father left, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, and felt nothing but a dull ache where love had once burned bright. The renovation plans in the contractor's possession were not for improvements, Ethan. They were for a complete transformation that would have erased every trace of your grandparents' legacy. And you didn't just proceed without my consent. You forged my signature, took out a fraudulent loan in my name, and lied to me repeatedly. It wasn't like that, he protested weakly. We got carried away, yes, but our intentions were good. We wanted to create a beautiful space for the whole family to enjoy. While putting me in debt for $350,000 at age 62, I shook my head. The bank is investigating the fraud. They'll likely pursue restitution from you directly, since you received the funds. Whatever legal consequences follow are your responsibility, not mine. His face paled. You can't be serious. You're my mother. And you're my son. That's why you're not in jail right now. I closed the door, walked to my kitchen, my own kitchen, still arranged exactly as I preferred, and made myself a cup of tea. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, I allowed myself to cry, mourning not just the destruction of my beloved cottage, but the loss of the relationship I thought I had with my son. In the weeks that followed, I received multiple calls and messages from Ethan and Melissa, alternating between apologies, justifications, and pleas for forgiveness. I responded to none of them. Dot checked on me regularly, offering the quiet support of true friendship without judgment or platitudes. "What will you do about the cottage?" she asked one afternoon as we walked through the local botanical gardens. "It's in such a state now." I had been pondering that very question. "I'm going to restore it," I decided. "Not to what it was. That's impossible now. But to something that honors its history while making it comfortable for my future." And that's exactly what I did. Using my own savings, carefully, thoughtfully, I hired a restoration specialist who understood the value of character and craftsmanship. We salvaged what we could from the dumpsters and local salvage yards, finding period-appropriate replacements for what couldn't be saved. The kitchen would never be exactly as it was, but its new incarnation respected the cottage's heritage while incorporating modest practical updates. Throughout the renovation, I drove up every weekend, working alongside the craftsmen, learning skills my father would have been proud to see me master. Each reclaimed board, each carefully restored fixture became part of my healing process. 6 months later, as spring breathed new life into the woods surrounding Lake Haven Cottage, the restoration was complete. The kitchen once again felt like the heart of the home, with warm wood cabinets, a farmhouse sink similar to the original, and countertops made from reclaimed barnwood. The layout remained traditional, honoring the cottage's history rather than erasing it for modern trends. I invited Dot to see it first. She walked through each room, nodding appreciatively. "It feels right," she said simply. "Like it's still your family's place, just refreshed." "That's exactly what I wanted," I replied, running my hand over the smooth surface of the new old kitchen table I'd found at an antique store. It wasn't the original, but it carried the same spirit. We sat on the rebuilt deck, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. "Have you heard from Ethan?" Dot asked carefully. I nodded. "The bank settled with him. He had to liquidate some investments and take out a personal loan, but the fraudulent home equity line has been canceled. No criminal charges were filed." "And your relationship?" I sighed, watching a pair of loons glide across the water's surface. "That's more complicated." We exchange brief texts about the grandchildren. I still see Noah and Emma every other weekend. Neutral territory, at the park or the Children's Museum. But Ethan and Melissa? I don't know if I'll ever fully trust them again. Dot reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's their loss, Sarah. They betrayed something precious for something fleeting." "Yes," I agreed, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the tree line. But in doing so, they gave me an unexpected gift. For the first time in my life, I'm living completely on my own terms. Not as a daughter, not as a wife, not even as a mother. Just as myself. That summer, I invited several women from my book club to spend a long weekend at the cottage. We laughed, shared stories, and created new memories in the space that had been restored not just physically, but spiritually. I listed a portion of the cottage on a selective vacation rental platform, carefully screening potential guests to ensure they would respect the property's character and history. The modest rental income covered the property taxes and maintenance, with a small surplus I used to fund art classes I'd always wanted to take. It wasn't the future I had imagined when I received that call from Claudia Jenkins about the property. Valuation. It was something entirely different. Something authentically mine. My kitchen remained arranged exactly as I preferred. My sanctuary secure behind new locks that protected more than just property. They protected my peace, my autonomy, and my hard-won wisdom about where to place my trust. Sometimes, rebuilding, what's broken requires first acknowledging that it can never be exactly what it was before. The cottage would always bear the scars of betrayal, visible in the places where original materials had been replaced. But like me, it had emerged from the destruction stronger, more authentic, and finally, truly mine. The morning after I'd received a call from Claudia Jenkins about the cottage's value, I found myself thinking about my financial situation more than I had in years. I'd always been the practical one, carefully budgeting my principal's pension, investing small amounts when I could. Robert had taught me one valuable lesson: never rely on a man for financial security. After he left, I'd thrown myself into learning about money, determined to never be caught off guard again. With a cup of coffee warming my hands, I sat on my back porch, watching cardinals at the feeder while I calculated how the cottage's sale would affect my future. The birds reminded me of my late mother, who had loved feeding them at our Lake Haven home. She'd spent her final summer there, watching the water and pointing out every flash of red among the trees. "Always a good sign," she'd say. "Cardinals, mean visitors from heaven." No cardinal had visited when Robert walked out, probably for the best. These memories lingered as I drove to my weekly lunch with Dorothy at the Bluebird Cafe. The small diner had been our Thursday ritual for over a decade, ever since we'd both retired from Cedar Grove Elementary, me as principal, Dot as the school nurse who'd patched up generations of scraped knees and hurt feelings. "You're glowing," she remarked as soon as I slid into our usual booth. "Did you win the lottery?" "Better," I replied, unfolding my napkin. "The cottage is worth $1, $2 million. Her fork clattered against her plate. "Sarah Thompson, since when?" I filled her in on Claudia's call, the unexpected valuation, and my tentative plans to sell. Dot listened intently, stirring her iced tea with a thoughtful expression. "What would you do with that kind of money?" she asked. "Help Ethan with a down payment on a bigger house. Set up college funds for Noah and Emma. Take that river cruise through Europe we've talked about. Finally, have some breathing room." Dot nodded, but I noticed her hesitation. "What aren't you saying?" She sighed. "It's just, you love that cottage. Every summer for as long as I've known you, that's been your happy place. Are you sure selling is right for you, not just for Ethan?" "I'm being practical," I insisted. "I'm 62. The property taxes increase every year, and the maintenance is getting harder. Better to use the money while I'm young enough to enjoy it." "If you're sure," she conceded, but her expression remained doubtful. After lunch, I ran into Helen Winters at the pharmacy. Helen had retired from accounting 5 years before me, and now spent most of her time organizing charity events and collecting gossip. She'd known Robert and me during our marriage, had watched our divorce unfold with barely concealed interest. "Sarah? I haven't seen you since the Senior Center fundraiser," she called across the aisle, abandoning her shopping cart to approach me. "How's that handsome son of yours? And those adorable grandchildren?" I gave her the expected update about Ethan's promotion, Noah's soccer achievements, and Emma's budding artistic talents. Helen nodded approvingly. "And how's Melissa?" she asked, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Still designing for those wealthy clients in the city?" Something in her tone made me pause. "Melissa's doing well. Her design business is growing." Helen made a non-committal sound. "I'm surprised she has time for clients with all the shopping she does. Marion saw her at Nordstrom last week, buying designer purses. 2 of them. Must be nice to have that kind of disposable income." I smiled politely, redirecting the conversation away from my daughter-in-law's spending habits. Helen had always enjoyed implying financial distress or moral failings in others. I'd learned long ago not to feed her appetite for drama. But as I drove home, Helen's comments nagged at me. Ethan and Melissa had been complaining about their financial struggles for months, how they couldn't afford the down payment on a larger home, how childcare costs were crippling them. Yet Melissa was apparently shopping for luxury items? I pushed the thought away. Melissa worked hard and deserved to treat herself occasionally, and designer items could be part of her professional image as an interior designer. There was surely a reasonable explanation. That evening, while reviewing my own finances, I received a text from Ethan. "Mom, are you free tomorrow evening? We'd love to talk more about the cottage renovation plans." I had assumed they'd need time to develop a proper proposal, but apparently they'd been working on this already. I texted back my agreement, curious to see what they'd come up with so quickly. The next day, I spent the morning volunteering at the community center's adult literacy program, helping a Ukrainian immigrant practice her English conversation skills. Nadia was in her 50s, rebuilding her life after leaving everything behind. Her determination reminded me of myself after Robert left, that same mix of fear and fierce resolve. "My daughter wants me to live with her family," Nadia confided during our session. "But I say no. I must have my own place, my own life. Family is important, but independence is." She searched for the word. "Essential," I supplied. She nodded emphatically. "Yes, essential." Her words echoed in my mind as I drove to Ethan and Melissa's townhouse that evening. Independence had been my hard-won prize after years of emotional and financial dependence on Robert. Was I too quick to sacrifice some of that independence? Now, letting Ethan and Melissa guide decisions about my most valuable asset? They welcomed me warmly, Ethan taking my coat while Melissa poured wine. Noah immediately dragged me to see his new Lego creation, while Emma shyly offered a drawing she'd made of Grandma's lake house. The children's genuine affection momentarily eased my concerns. Whatever reservations I had about the renovation proposal, these were my grandchildren, my family. After the children went to bed, Melissa connected her laptop to their television, projecting what looked like professional design slides. "We've been working on this for a while," she admitted. "Ever since our last visit to the cottage. We could see how much work it needed, and we wanted to be prepared with ideas." They'd been planning this before the property valuation? Before I'd even considered selling? I kept my expression neutral as Melissa began clicking through beautifully rendered images of a transformed Lake Haven cottage. "We're calling it Modern Lakeside Retreat," she explained enthusiastically. "The core concept is opening up the space to maximize lake views while maintaining rustic charm through carefully selected materials." The images showed a completely reimagined cottage, walls removed to create an open-concept main floor. The kitchen relocated to face the lake. The original stone fireplace replaced with a sleek gas version. Master suite expanded by eliminating one bedroom. New floor-to-ceiling windows across the entire lake-facing wall. "What do you think?" Ethan asked eagerly as Melissa finished the presentation. I took a sip of wine, buying time to compose my thoughts. "It's certainly different. Very beautiful, but barely recognizable as the same cottage." "That's the point," Melissa said, clicking back to an image of the expanded deck. "The current layout is outdated, inefficient. This redesign maximizes the property's potential." "And the rental appeal," Ethan added. "Premium lakefront rentals like this can command $3,000 to $4,000 per week during peak season." "But where would the family photos go?" I asked, thinking of the built-in bookshelves my grandfather had crafted, now missing from the designs. "And my mother's quilts? The antique fishing gear collection?" Melissa and Ethan exchanged glances. "We thought those could be stored," Melissa said carefully. "They don't really fit the aesthetic we're aiming for." "The aesthetic," I repeated, slowly. "I see." "Mom," Ethan interjected, leaning forward, "we know you love the cottage as it is, but it's also a tremendous financial asset that's currently underutilized. This renovation would increase its value even further while generating substantial rental income." "And what about my use of the cottage?" I asked. "When would I stay there if it's being rented out?" "You'd have priority booking, of course," Melissa assured me. "We'd block out whatever weeks you wanted, and you could use the rental income to take vacations elsewhere. Wouldn't you love to visit Europe instead of spending every summer in the same place?" There was a certain logic to their arguments. The cottage did need updates, and rental income would help with expenses. But something felt off about the entire conversation. They weren't presenting options for me to consider. They were selling me on a vision they'd already committed to in their minds. "What about the cost?" I asked. This looks like a complete reconstruction, not just a renovation. Ethan cleared his throat. We've already spoken with a contractor. The estimated budget is around $300,000. $300,000? I nearly choked on my wine. That's a quarter of the property's value. But it would increase the value substantially, Melissa countered. And with your excellent credit and the equity in the property, we can secure favorable financing. I set down my glass. Let me be clear. I'm not taking out a loan for $300,000 at my age. If we proceed with any renovation, it will be with cash and on a much more modest scale. Ethan's expression tightened. Mom, that's short-sighted. Interest rates are historically low. This is the perfect time to leverage the property's equity. I'm not leveraging anything, I replied firmly. I've spent my entire adult life being careful with money, and I'm not changing that now. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Finally, Melissa spoke, her tone conciliatory. We understand. You're concerned, Sarah. Why don't we all visit the cottage next weekend? See it together, discuss more moderate options that might make everyone happy? I agreed, though uneasiness lingered as I drove home that night. Their vision for the cottage was so radically different from mine, and their casual assumption that I would take on substantial debt was troubling. Still, a weekend visit would give us time to talk through alternatives, find a reasonable middle ground. The following morning, I called my bank to schedule an appointment with a financial advisor. If we were going to discuss renovation options, I wanted clarity about what I could comfortably afford without compromising my retirement security. The bank representative, a young woman named Jennifer, asked for my account information to schedule the appointment. As she reviewed my profile, she paused. Ms. Thompson, I see you've recently applied for a home equity line of credit. Would you like to discuss that with the advisor as well? I frowned. There must be a mistake. I haven't applied for any loans. She hesitated. According to our system, an application was submitted online 3 days ago, using your customer credentials. It's still in process, but preliminary approval has been granted for $350,000. My hands turned cold. I never submitted any loan application. Could someone have made an error? Let me check further, Jennifer said, keyboard clicking in the background. After a moment, she continued. The application was completed online using your user ID and password. The property listed is 8721 Lakeshore Drive in Pine Ridge. Lake Haven Cottage. Someone had applied for a loan against my property without my knowledge or consent. The implications were staggering and terrifying. I need to speak with your fraud department immediately, I said, my voice remarkably steady considering the adrenaline surging through me. That application was not submitted by me. The next hour passed in a blur of security questions, account freezes, and detailed explanations. The fraud specialist explained that the application had been submitted from an IP address in Cedar Grove, using my correct login credentials, social security number, and personal details. Supporting documentation, including tax returns and bank statements, had been uploaded to complete the application. We'll investigate immediately, the specialist assured me. In the meantime, we've flagged the application and placed a security hold on your accounts. As soon as I hung up, I called Frank, my financial advisor of 20 years. After explaining the situation, I asked, Is there any way to see what else might have been done in my name? I can run a credit check, he offered. That would show any recent inquiries or new accounts. I authorized him to proceed, then sat at my kitchen table, hands trembling as I contemplated who could have done this. The obvious answer, the one I couldn't bear to consider, loomed largest. Who else had access to my personal information, knowledge of the cottage's value, and a vested interest in a $350,000 renovation? Frank called back 30 minutes later, his tone grave. Sarah, the credit report shows multiple recent inquiries from lenders There's a new credit card account opened in your name 2 weeks ago with a $25,000 limit. And someone has been checking rates on construction loans specifically for vacation properties. My stomach twisted painfully. What do I do now? File a police report immediately, he advised. Then contact the credit bureaus to place a fraud alert on your profile. I'd also recommend changing all your passwords and considering legal counsel. After hanging up, I sat motionless, struggling to process what was happening. Could Ethan and Melissa really have gone this far? Committed identity theft and fraud against me, their mother and mother-in-law? The grandmother of their children? I thought back to Helen's comments about Melissa's shopping habits, to the elaborate renovation plans they'd presented, to their insistence on financing rather than paying cash. Had they been manipulating me from the beginning, seeing the cottage, not as a cherished family legacy, but as an untapped financial resource they could exploit? Before I could spiral further into these painful questions, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Elite Renovations. I answered cautiously. Ms. Thompson, this is Greg Barton from Elite Renovations. I'm calling to confirm our appointment tomorrow. Morning at your Lake Haven property. My crew will be there at 8 to begin preliminary measurements and testing. I clutched the phone tighter. I haven't scheduled any appointments with your company, Mr. Barton. He paused. That's strange. I have a signed contract here authorizing us to begin work on a complete renovation of the property. The contract was signed by Ethan Thompson with your power of attorney. Power of attorney? I had never granted Ethan power of attorney for anything. Mr. Barton, I need you to email me a copy of that contract immediately. No work is to begin on my property without my direct authorization. Is that clear? Of course, Ms. Thompson. I'll send it right away. He sounded confused but compliant. Within minutes, my email pinged with the promised document. The contract was comprehensive, outlining a complete gut renovation valued at $327,150. Attached was a power of attorney document with what appeared to be my signature, dated 3 weeks earlier, giving Ethan full authority to make decisions regarding the Lake Haven property. The signature was a convincing forgery, but a forgery nonetheless. I had never signed such a document, had never even seen it before this moment. My son had not only applied for loans in my name, but had forged legal documents to gain control of my property. I printed the contract and power of attorney, adding them to the growing file of evidence. Then, with a heavy heart, I drove to the Cedar Grove Police Department to file a fraud report. Officer Martinez listened to my explanation with a sympathetic but professional demeanor, taking detailed notes as I provided copies of the fraudulent loan application, credit card account, and renovation contract. Ms. Thompson, he said gently when I'd finished, I understand this is difficult, but I need to ask, are you certain your son acted without your knowledge or consent? Family financial arrangements can sometimes be complicated. I have never authorized Ethan or anyone else to take out loans in my name, I stated firmly. I did not sign a power of attorney, and I did not approve this renovation contract. My property and my identity have been used fraudulently. Officer Martinez nodded. We'll investigate thoroughly. In the meantime, continue working with your bank and credit bureaus to secure your accounts, and I'd suggest visiting the cottage as soon as possible to ensure no unauthorized work has begun. As I left the police station, my phone showed 3 missed calls from Ethan. I wasn't ready to confront him yet, not until I had seen the cottage and gathered all the facts. Instead, I called Dot. I need a favor, I said when she answered. Can you drive up to Lake Haven with me tomorrow morning? I need a witness. A witness? Sarah, what's happening? I explained the situation as calmly as I could, though my voice broke when I reached the part about the forged power of attorney. Oh, Sarah, she breathed. Are you sure? I have the documents, Dot. His name, his signature, authorizing everything in my name. I just need to see if they've already started work on the cottage. I'll be at your house at 6 tomorrow morning, she said without hesitation. We'll face this together. That night was the longest of my life. I alternated between stunned disbelief and waves of grief so intense they left me gasping. How had my relationship with my son deteriorated to this point without my realizing it? What desperation or entitlement had driven him to such betrayal? And how could I ever trust him again? By morning, grief had hardened into resolve. I needed answers, and I needed to protect myself from further exploitation. Dot arrived precisely at 6, a thermos of coffee and bag of scones in hand. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, passing me a travel mug. "But you're still standing. That's what matters." The drive to Lake Haven took just under 2 hours, our conversation minimal as I focused on navigating the increasingly rural roads. As we turned onto the familiar gravel lane leading to the cottage, I gasped. A large dumpster sat in the driveway, and a truck bearing the Elite Renovations logo was parked on the grass. "They've already started," I whispered, hands tightening on the steering wheel. We parked behind the truck and approached the cottage cautiously. The front door stood open, and the sounds of hammering and power tools echoed from inside. I stepped through the doorway and froze in horror. The cozy living room I had lovingly maintained for decades was unrecognizable. The original hardwood floors were covered in protective sheeting, but sections had already been removed, exposing the subfloor. The built-in bookshelves where generations of family photos had been displayed were gone, leaving only exposed studs. The stone fireplace, hand-built by my grandfather in 1948, had been partially dismantled, its river stones piled unceremoniously to one side. I moved through the destruction in a daze, Dot following silently behind. The dining room's wainscoting had been stripped away. The vintage light fixtures were missing. And the kitchen, my mother's kitchen, where I'd learned to bake, where I'd taught Ethan to make pancakes, was completely gutted. A man in a hard hat looked up from his clipboard as we entered what remained of the kitchen. "Can I help you, ladies? I'm Sarah Thompson. I own this property." My voice sounded strange, distant, as though someone else were speaking. "Who authorized this demolition?" He consulted his clipboard. "Let's see. Contract signed by Ethan Thompson as power of attorney for Sarah Thompson. Work ordered to begin yesterday." He glanced up, noting my expression. "Is there a problem?" "Yes, there's a problem. I never authorized this work. The power of attorney is fraudulent." The man, presumably Greg Barton from our phone conversation, blanched. "Ma'am, I have a signed legal contract. We've already ordered custom cabinets and fixtures. The demolition is well underway." "Stop all work immediately," I ordered, struggling to maintain composure. "My attorney will be in contact regarding the fraudulent contract. Until then, nothing further is to be touched or removed from this property." As the workers reluctantly set down their tools, I walked through each room, photographing the destruction. With my phone. Dot followed, occasionally squeezing my arm in silent support. The damage was extensive, far beyond simple demo work in preparation for renovation. This was a systematic erasure of the cottage's character and history. In what had been my bedroom, I found a set of architectural plans spread across a makeshift table. The drawings showed a completely reimagined structure that barely resembled the original cottage. The modest 3-bedroom layout had been transformed into an open-concept entertainment space with a gourmet kitchen, master suite, and auxiliary rooms labeled media room and home gym. "This isn't a renovation," I said quietly to Dot. "It's a complete rebuild designed as a luxury rental property." She studied the plans, frowning. "Sarah, look at this." She pointed to a notation in the margin. "Confirm lake frontage for dock expansion permit." I leaned closer. Additional notes detailed plans for a boat dock, lakeside sauna, and outdoor kitchen, none of which had been mentioned in the presentation Ethan and Melissa had shown me. The estimated costs for these additions alone exceeded $100,000. They were planning to spend nearly $500,000 of my money without my knowledge or consent, I said, the full scope of the betrayal finally sinking in, transforming my family home into a luxury rental investment for themselves. As I stood amidst the ruins of my beloved cottage, my phone rang. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. With trembling fingers, I answered and put it on speaker. "Mom? Where are you?" he demanded without preamble. "I've been trying to reach you since yesterday." "I'm at Lake Haven Cottage," I replied coldly, "looking at what's left of my family home after your unauthorized demolition." A pause. "Mom, you're overreacting. We discussed the renovation. We discussed a possible kitchen update, not this complete destruction." My voice rose despite my efforts to remain calm. "And we certainly never discussed you forging my signature on loan applications and a fraudulent power of attorney." Another, longer pause. "Who told you that?" "The bank, the police, the contractor standing in what used to be my kitchen." Each word fell like a stone. "How could you do this, Ethan? Your own mother?" "It's not what you think," he said quickly. "Yes, I signed some paperwork to get things moving, but it was for your benefit. The property needs updating to maintain its value, and you were hesitating. I was just trying to help." "By committing fraud? By destroying the cottage your grandfather built?" "That's unnecessarily dramatic," he replied, his tone hardening. "It's just an old building that needed modernizing. We're increasing its value and rental potential. You'll thank us when the renovation is complete, and you're earning thousands in rental income every month." His casual dismissal of my feelings, of the cottage's significance, of the law itself, stunned me into momentary silence. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, controlled. "The renovation will not be completed. The fraudulent loan will not be processed, and you will never set foot on this property again. Mom, be reasonable. I've filed a police report naming you and Melissa as suspects in identity theft and fraud. I've contacted my attorney to begin legal proceedings to recover damages to my property, and I'm changing my will to ensure you never benefit from my assets in the future." "You can't be serious," he sputtered. "We're your family." "Family doesn't steal from family," I replied simply. "Goodbye, Ethan." I ended the call and turned to Dot, who had witnessed the entire exchange with a stricken expression. "Sarah," she said gently, "are you sure about this? Once you start legal proceedings against your own son—" "He started this," I interrupted, a strange calm settling over me. "When he forged my signature, when he applied for loans in my name, when he authorized the destruction of my family's legacy. Every step of the way, he made choices knowing they were wrong, illegal, and hurtful." I took a final look around the gutted room that had once been filled with cherished memories. "I need to call my lawyer and the locksmith. Then we'll head back to Cedar Grove." By late afternoon, new locks had been installed on all doors. The contractor had been served with legal notice to cease all work, and my attorney had begun the process of filing civil charges against Ethan and Melissa for fraud, property damage, and breach of fiduciary duty. The police investigation was ongoing, with criminal charges possible depending on their findings. As Dot and I drove back to Cedar Grove in the fading light, she asked the question I'd been avoiding all day. "What about Noah and Emma? Your grandchildren?" Tears I'd been holding back all day finally spilled over. "I don't know, Dot. I don't know how to separate my love for them from what their parents have done. I don't know how to be a grandmother without being a mother first." She reached across to squeeze my hand. "One day at a time, Sarah. First, protect yourself, then figure out the rest." Back in Cedar Grove, I collapsed into bed, emotionally and physically exhausted. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the demolished cottage, the forged signatures, the architectural plans that would have erased every trace of my family's history. Around midnight, my phone lit up with a text from Melissa. "Sarah, please talk to us. This is all a misunderstanding. We were only trying to help create a beautiful legacy property the whole family could enjoy. Ethan made some mistakes in how he handled the paperwork, but his heart was in the right place. Let's meet tomorrow and work this out as a family. A misunderstanding? Mistakes in handling paperwork? Their attempt to minimize what they'd done only reinforced my resolve. This wasn't a simple miscommunication or well-intentioned overreach. It was calculated deception and theft on a massive scale. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I opened my laptop and began writing a detailed account of everything that had happened. The property valuation, the initial discussions about selling or renovating, the discovery of the fraudulent loan applications and forged power of attorney, the unauthorized demolition. I included dates, names, photos, and copies of all relevant documents. When I finished, it was nearly 4 a.m. I saved the document, printed a copy for my files, and finally fell into a fitful sleep. The worst day of my life was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. The next morning, after 3 hours of restless sleep, I awoke to multiple missed calls and messages from Ethan, Melissa, and numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the day's necessary tasks: meeting with my attorney, filing additional fraud reports with credit bureaus, and beginning the painful process of securing what remained of my property and financial identity. My attorney, Patricia Winters, reviewed all the evidence I'd gathered and confirmed what I already knew. I had a strong case against Ethan and Melissa for civil damages, and the police investigation would likely result in criminal charges as, "Well, you have options," Patricia explained gently. "We can pursue full civil and criminal liability, or we can attempt to negotiate a settlement that avoids criminal prosecution but ensures you're compensated for damages." "What would you recommend?" I asked numbly. She hesitated. "Legally, they've committed serious crimes. The evidence is overwhelming. But they're your family, and criminal fraud convictions would devastate their futures, jobs, housing, everything." I nodded, understanding the weight of the decision before me. "I need time to think." "Of course," she agreed. "In the meantime, I'll file for an emergency injunction to prevent any further work on the cottage and to freeze the fraudulent loan proceedings." As I left Patricia's office, my phone rang again. This time, it was Helen Winters. I nearly declined the call. The last thing I needed was Helen's gossip. But something made me answer. "Sarah, I just heard the most disturbing rumor," she began without greeting. "Someone said Ethan and Melissa are telling people you've had some kind of mental break, that you've forgotten giving them permission to renovate the cottage and are now making wild accusations." My hand tightened on the phone. "What?" "Marion's daughter works at their pediatrician's office. She overheard Melissa telling the doctor you've been behaving erratically, forgetting conversations, making things up. They're suggesting you might be in the early stages of dementia." Cold fury replaced the numbness I'd been feeling since discovering the demolition. They were not only stealing from me and destroying my property, but attempting to discredit me by questioning my mental competence. "Thank you for telling me, Helen," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "If you hear anything else, I'd appreciate knowing." "Of course, dear. Are you all right? Do you need anything?" For the first time, I heard genuine concern in Helen's voice, rather than curiosity or judgment. "I'm handling it," I assured her, "but I might need witnesses in the future. People who can attest to my mental clarity and memory." "You can count on me," she promised, "and I'll speak with Marion and the others from the Bridge Club. We won't stand for this kind of treatment of one of our own." After hanging up, I drove directly to my primary care physician's office and requested a complete cognitive assessment. Dr. Patel, who had been my doctor for 15 years, was confused but cooperative. "I've seen no indications of cognitive decline, Sarah, but if you're concerned, we can certainly do a thorough evaluation." "It's not concern," I explained. "It's protection. I need documented evidence of my cognitive health. 2 hours and several tests later, I had what I needed. Formal medical documentation confirming that my cognitive function was excellent for my age, with no indications of dementia or memory issues. I asked for multiple copies, sending one directly to Patricia's office. By the time I returned home, it was late afternoon. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. Moments after I entered my house, the doorbell rang. Standing on my porch were Ethan, Melissa, and an older man I didn't recognize. "Mom," Ethan began, his expression earnest. "This is Dr. Reynolds. He's a geriatric specialist. We're concerned about your recent behavior and thought it might be helpful to have a consultation." They had actually brought a doctor to my home to evaluate me without warning or consent. The audacity was breathtaking. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "All of you." "Mom, please," Melissa interjected, stepping forward. "We're just worried about you. These accusations, the police report, it's not like you. Dr. Reynolds just wants to talk." I turned to the doctor. "Are you aware that these individuals are currently under investigation for fraud and identity theft? That they've forged my signature on legal documents and loan applications? That they've destroyed my property without authorization?" Dr. Reynolds looked uncomfortable. "They mentioned some family disagreements about a renovation project." "Not disagreements. Crimes." I fixed my gaze on Ethan. "I have been formally evaluated by Dr. Patel and found to have excellent cognitive function with no signs of impairment. That documentation has been sent to my attorney to counter your despicable attempts to discredit me." Ethan's face flushed. "Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion. If you don't leave immediately, I will call the police and report you for harassment." I stepped back and began closing the door. Any further communication can go through my attorney. I locked the door and watched through the window as they returned to their car, Ethan gesticulating angrily while Melissa appeared to be crying. The doctor looked deeply uncomfortable, as well he should. They had attempted to weaponize medical authority against me, to have me declared incompetent so they could proceed with their plans unfettered. This final betrayal crystallized something within me. Whatever love and trust had existed between us was now irreparably broken. They weren't just taking advantage of me financially. They were attempting to strip me of my agency, my credibility, my very identity. I picked up the phone and called Patricia. "I've made my decision," I said when she answered. "I want to pursue full civil and criminal liability. No negotiations, no settlements." "Are you certain?" she asked, clearly hearing the resolve in my voice. "This path will likely permanently sever your relationship with your son." "They've already severed it," I replied, watching their car finally pull away from the curb. "I'm just making it official." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, my own kitchen, arranged exactly as I preferred it, and began the painful process of reimagining my future. A future without my son and daughter-in-law in it. A future where my relationship with my grandchildren would be fundamentally altered. A future where the family cottage, now gutted and defaced, would somehow need to be restored or reimagined. It was the hardest night of my life. But as dawn broke over Cedar Grove, illuminating my garden where spring flowers were just beginning to emerge, I felt something unexpected alongside the grief. A quiet, steely determination. They had tried to take everything from me, my property, my money, my reputation, even my sanity. But in doing so, they had awakened something they never anticipated, my capacity to fight back. The legal wheels turned slowly in the weeks following my discovery of the fraud. Each day brought new revelations about the extent of Ethan and Melissa's deception. They had not only forged my signature on loan documents and the power of attorney, but had systematically exploited my trust for years before that. My attorney, Patricia, had insisted on a thorough financial investigation, which revealed small, unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts dating back nearly 3 years. $50 here, $100 there. amounts small enough that I hadn't noticed them among my regular expenses, but which had accumulated to over $15,000. It's a common pattern, Patricia explained as we reviewed the investigator's report in her office. Start small, test the boundaries, then escalate when there's no consequence. I nodded, fighting back tears as I signed the affidavit confirming these transactions were unauthorized. Each signature felt like another nail in the coffin of my relationship with my son. The district attorney believes there's sufficient evidence for criminal charges, Patricia continued gently. But they're still giving you the option to handle this as a civil matter. Given the family relationship, they understand your reluctance to seek criminal prosecution. I sighed, looking out her office window at the maple trees beginning to bud in the courthouse square. Spring was arriving, the season of renewal, yet all I felt was the winter of betrayal. What would you do? I asked finally, turning back to meet her gaze. If it were your child? Patricia removed her reading glasses, her expression somber. I wish I had a simple answer for you, Sarah. Legally, what they've done merits criminal prosecution. The evidence is overwhelming, and the intent was clearly malicious. But as a mother... She paused. I understand the impossible position you're in. I need to protect myself, I said, more to convince myself than her. They've shown no remorse, only escalation. The attempts to question my competency, the lies they're telling about me in the community. Then I think you have your answer, she replied quietly. Sometimes the hardest choices are also the clearest. That evening, I found myself driving aimlessly through Cedar Grove, passing familiar landmarks that now seemed to belong to another lifetime. The elementary school where I'd served as principal for 20 years, the park where I'd pushed Ethan on the swings every Sunday afternoon, the ice cream shop where we'd celebrated the end of each school year with double-scoop cones. Without conscious intent, I found myself turning onto Elmwood Avenue, where Robert and I had bought our first home, the house where Ethan had taken his first steps, said his first words, grown from infant to toddler to stubborn teenager. I slowed as I approached the modest colonial with its blue shutters and white picket fence. The current owners had planted hydrangeas along the walkway, a choice I'd considered but never implemented during our time there. A basketball hoop stood in the driveway, much like the one Robert had installed for Ethan's 10th birthday. That birthday had been just weeks before everything fell apart. Before I discovered Robert's affair with his colleague Vanessa. Before the screaming matches and silent treatments. Before he moved out, leaving me with a 12-year-old son and a mortgage I could barely afford on a vice principal's salary. I had trusted Robert completely, never questioning his late nights at the office or weekend conferences. Just as I had trusted Ethan and Melissa when they'd presented their renovation plans, assuming their intentions were honest, if misguided. Had I learned nothing in 30 years? As I sat parked across from my former home, memories flooded back. Not just of the betrayals, but of the warning signs I'd ignored. Robert's increasing emotional distance, the unexplained charges on our credit card, the sudden interest in his appearance after years of indifference. With Ethan and Melissa, there had been signs too. Their persistent questions about my finances. The casual suggestions that I update my will. Melissa's designer purses despite their claimed financial struggles. Ethan's dismissive attitude toward the cottage's sentimental value. Looking back now, with the clarity of hindsight, the pattern was painfully obvious. But I had chosen not to see it, just as I had chosen not to see Robert's infidelity until confronted with irrefutable evidence. My phone rang, interrupting this. Painful reflection. It was Dot. "Where are you?" she demanded without preamble. "I've been knocking on your door for 10 minutes. "Sorry," I replied, suddenly aware of how long I'd been sitting outside my old house. "I went for a drive. I'll head home now. Are you okay?" Her voice softened with concern. "You don't sound like yourself." "I'm fine," I lied. just remembering. When I arrived home 20 minutes later, Dot was waiting on my porch swing, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses beside her. "Spill it," she said as I settled next to her. "And I don't mean the wine." I accepted the glass she offered, taking a sip before responding. "I was just thinking about patterns, how we repeat the same mistakes without realizing it." "You mean trusting people who don't deserve it?" I nodded. With Robert, I ignored the signs because I couldn't face what they meant. With Ethan and Melissa. My voice caught. I did the same thing. Dot topped off my glass before refilling her own. "Sarah Thompson, you listen to me. There is a world of difference between trusting your husband and trusting your child. One's a calculated risk, the other is. It's fundamental, instinctive. But the outcome is the same," I argued. "I'm left picking up the pieces while they move on without consequences." "Not this time," Dot reminded me firmly. "This time, you're fighting back." We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the streetlights flicker on as dusk settled over Cedar Grove. Finally, I voiced the question that had been haunting me for weeks. What if it's my fault somehow? What if I failed Ethan as a mother, and this is the result? Dot's response was immediate and emphatic. "Absolutely not. You were an exceptional mother, devoted, supportive, sacrificing everything for that boy's well-being. Whatever choices Ethan is making now, they're his responsibility, not yours." "But something must have gone wrong somewhere," I persisted. "Children don't just wake up one day and decide to defraud their parents." Dot sighed heavily. "If you're looking for root causes, maybe consider Robert's influence. Ethan spent those formative teenage years watching his father build a new life, with the woman he cheated with. Watching him prosper while you struggled. Maybe those weren't the best lessons about honesty and consequences." Her words struck a chord I hadn't considered. After the divorce, Robert had indeed flourished professionally. His relationship with Vanessa had quickly become serious, culminating in marriage just 2 years after our divorce was finalized. Their lifestyle, the luxury car, the lavish vacations, the country club membership, had been a stark contrast to the financial constraints Ethan experienced living with me. "Robert always made it look so easy," I murmured, "like betrayal carried no real cost." "Exactly," Dot agreed. "And teenagers are impressionable. They notice who seems to be winning in life." I hadn't wanted to acknowledge it at the time, but Ethan's attitude had shifted noticeably during his high school years. The weekends he spent with Robert and Vanessa became longer, his return to our modest home marked by increasing dissatisfaction. Designer clothes appeared in his closet, gifts from Robert that I couldn't possibly match. Comments about our depressing apartment compared to his father's new house became more frequent. By the time Ethan left for college, our relationship had grown strained. I had attributed it to normal teenage rebellion and the lingering trauma of the divorce. But perhaps there had been something deeper at work, a fundamental shift in values, a lesson learned from watching his father's seeming immunity to consequences. "I tried so hard to teach him integrity," I said softly. "To show him that character matters more than possessions, that honesty and hard work are their own rewards." "And those lessons may still take root someday," Dot replied. "But right now, you need to focus on protecting yourself. The past can't be changed, but your future is still in your hands." The next morning, I met with Patricia to sign the formal complaint authorizing criminal charges against Ethan and Melissa. My hand trembled slightly as I signed each page, but my resolve remained firm. They had made their choices. Now they would face the consequences. "The district attorney will contact them directly," Patricia explained. "Given the evidence, they'll likely offer a plea deal to avoid trial. That would mean admitting guilt, but potentially receiving a lighter sentence." "What kind of sentence should I expect?" I asked, the reality of what I was setting in motion finally sinking in. For first-time offenders in a white-collar case like this, probably probation, community service, restitution, and possibly a short jail term. It depends on whether they accept responsibility or try to fight the charges. The thought of Ethan in jail made my stomach clench, but I pushed the image aside. He had brought this on himself, on all of us. My responsibility now was to rebuild my own life, not to shield him from the consequences of his actions. As I left Patricia's office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Lucinda Porter, Noah's kindergarten teacher. Could you please call me when you have a moment? It's regarding Noah's current situation." Noah, my grandson. In the chaos of the past weeks, I had been so consumed by the betrayal that I'd barely had time to process what it meant for my relationship with the children. Noah was only 6, Emma just 4. Too young to understand what was happening, but certainly old enough to feel the effects of my sudden absence from their lives. I called the number immediately. "Thank you for returning my call, Mrs. Thompson," Lucinda began. "I hope you don't mind, but Noah talks about you frequently, and when I noticed changes in his behavior recently, I thought you might be able to help." "What kind of changes?" I asked, my heart constricting. "Withdrawal, difficulty concentrating, emotional outbursts. He's been drawing pictures of what he calls Grandma's broken house and asking when he can visit you again." She paused. "I understand there may be family issues at play, but Noah is clearly struggling with the disruption in his relationship with you." Tears filled my eyes. "It's complicated," I managed. "His parents and I are. There's a legal situation." "I see," she replied, her tone carefully neutral. "I'm not asking about the details. I'm just concerned about Noah. Would it be possible for you to send him a note or something, just so he knows you're thinking of him? It might help." "Of course," I said immediately. "And thank you for calling, for caring enough to reach out." After hanging up, I sat in my car, overwhelmed by a fresh wave of grief. Noah and Emma were innocent casualties in this war between their parents and me. They couldn't possibly understand why their grandmother had suddenly disappeared from their lives, why weekend visits and bedtime stories had abruptly ceased. That afternoon, I purchased 2 stuffed animals, a lion for Noah and a unicorn for Emma, and wrote each child a card explaining that I missed them very much and was thinking of them every day. I considered including an explanation about the grown-up problems between me and their parents, but ultimately decided against it. They were too young to understand, and it wasn't their burden to bear. I arranged for the gifts to be delivered to their school and preschool respectively, knowing that a direct delivery to their home would likely be intercepted. It wasn't much, but it was all I could do for now. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn to the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, the repository of family mementos I'd accumulated over decades. Lifting the heavy lid, I was engulfed by the familiar scent of cedar and old paper. Inside lay the tangible evidence of a life fully lived: photo albums, school projects, handwritten letters, baby clothes. I pulled out the baby book I'd so meticulously kept during Ethan's first years, each milestone carefully recorded in my neat handwriting. First smile, 6 weeks. First tooth, 5 months, 3 days. First steps, 11 months exactly. The lock of hair from his first haircut. The hospital bracelet from his birth. The tiny handprint pressed into clay for Mother's Day when he was 3. How had we gone from those precious moments to this? How had the sweet-faced toddler who'd clung to my legs every morning become the man who would forge my signature and attempt to steal my property? Next came the school albums. Ethan in his soccer uniform, proud gap-toothed smile as he held up a trophy. Ethan at the science fair, his volcano project earning first place. Ethan as a lanky teenager receiving his Eagle Scout badge, my arm around his shoulders. I had been so proud of him, so certain he was growing into a man of character and integrity. Had it all been an illusion, or had something fundamental changed along the way? Deeper in the chest lay the painful mementos I rarely examined, the divorce papers, tucked into a manila envelope, the court-ordered child support agreements that Robert had frequently ignored, the journal I'd kept during those dark years, documenting my struggle to maintain stability for Ethan while working full-time and earning my principal's certification at night. I hadn't wanted Ethan to see my pain back then. I'd hidden the tears, the anxiety, the bone-deep fatigue. I'd presented a strong front, assuring him that we were fine, that his father's absence didn't define us, that we would make our own way. But children see more than we realize. Perhaps Ethan had interpreted my determination as detachment, my independence as a rejection of help. Perhaps he had resented the modest lifestyle my salary could provide compared to the affluence Robert flaunted. Or perhaps I was still making excuses for him, still trying to find explanations that would make his betrayal somehow less deliberate, less cruel. The last item in the chest was a framed photo I'd removed from my living room wall years ago. Ethan's wedding day. He stood proudly in his tuxedo, Melissa radiant beside him in her designer gown. I stood to their left, smiling but slightly separate, wearing the blue dress I'd spent too much on because I wanted to look my best for the society wedding Melissa had insisted upon. Robert and Vanessa dominated the right side of the photo, looking more like the proud parents than I did. Robert's arm was draped casually around Ethan's shoulders, Vanessa's hand resting on Melissa's arm. They made a striking quartet, prosperous, attractive, connected. Looking at it now, I could see what hadn't been obvious to me then. I was the outsider at my own son's wedding, the necessary but not quite welcome presence, the reminder of humble origins and difficult years that didn't fit the narrative of success they were constructing. Had it begun even then? This gradual erasure of my place in Ethan's life? This revision of history that cast me as the obstacle rather than the foundation? I replaced the photo and closed the chest, no closer to understanding but somehow clearer about my path forward. The past couldn't be rewritten, but it didn't dictate my future either. Whatever role I had played in shaping Ethan, for better or worse, was complete. He was a grown man making his own choices, and I was a woman with decades of life still ahead of me. The next morning brought news I hadn't expected. Patricia called early, her voice unusually animated. "I've just heard from the district attorney. Ethan and Melissa have been offered a plea deal, but they're refusing it. Instead, they've hired Stanley Abernathy." "Who's Stanley Abernathy?" I asked, unfamiliar with the name. "Only the most aggressive criminal defense attorney in the state. He specializes in high-profile cases and creative defenses." A chill ran through me. What does that mean for the case? It means they're not taking responsibility. They're planning to fight the charges, possibly by doubling down on the claim that you authorized everything and are now experiencing memory issues. Despite the seriousness of the situation, I almost laughed. They're really going with the crazy old lady defense after I've been formally evaluated and cleared by 2 different doctors? It's desperate, Patricia agreed, but desperation makes people dangerous. Abernathy is known for turning victims into villains. He'll try to paint you as vindictive, confused, manipulative, anything to create reasonable doubt. Let him try, I replied, surprised by my own calm. The truth is on our side. Yes, but trials are unpredictable, and they're emotionally draining even under the best circumstances. Are you sure you want to go through with this? We could still pursue civil remedies instead. I thought about it for a long moment, weighing the personal cost against the principles at stake. If we back down now, what message does that send? That they can commit fraud and forgery with impunity because I'm their mother? That family ties excuse criminal behavior? No one would blame you for choosing the less confrontational path, Patricia said gently. This is your son we're talking about. And this is my life, I countered. My identity, my property, my future security. They were willing to sacrifice all of that for their own gain. If I don't stand up for myself now, where does it end? Patricia's voice softened with respect. Then we'll prepare for trial. But Sarah, brace yourself. It's going to get ugly before it gets better. She wasn't wrong. Within days, the local gossip mill was churning with rumors about my mental state, my relationship with Ethan, and the real story behind the criminal charges. Former colleagues called to check on me, their concern barely masking their curiosity. Neighbors who had known me for decades suddenly found reasons to cross the street rather than engage in conversation. Helen Winters, true to her word, became my unexpected defender, shutting down speculation at the senior center and organizing what she called a support squad of friends who made a point of being seen with me around town. Dot was my constant companion for grocery shopping and errands, her fierce loyalty a shield against whispers and stares. But the most painful blow came from an unexpected source. Returning from a meeting with Patricia one afternoon, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a formal notification from Cedar Grove Community Church, the congregation I'd belonged to for over 30 years, informing me that my upcoming volunteer work with the children's ministry was on hold pending resolution of current issues. I had taught Sunday school since Ethan was small, had served on committees, organized food drives, and attended weekly services even during the darkest days after my divorce. Now, based on nothing but rumors and innuendo, I was deemed unsuitable to read Bible stories to children. The rejection stung more than I cared to admit. I had expected opposition from Ethan and Melissa's friends, perhaps even from those who had always been closer to Robert. But to be ostracized by my faith community, the people who claimed to value truth and justice above all, felt like a fundamental betrayal of shared values. That Sunday, I sat in my usual pew, chin high, ignoring the sidelong glances and whispered conversations. After the service, Pastor Richards approached, his expression carefully neutral. "Sarah, I hope you understand the church's position. We're not taking sides, but with accusations of this nature, we have to be cautious." "Accusations?" I echoed, keeping my voice level. "Pastor, there are documented forgeries, fraudulent loan, applications, and unauthorized destruction of property. Those aren't accusations, they're facts." He shifted uncomfortably. "Melissa's parents have been very clear that there's another side to this story. They're valued members of our congregation, and they're deeply concerned about their daughter's reputation." Of course. Melissa's parents, Walter and Catherine Blake, were major financial contributors to the church. Their annual donations funded the youth program and subsidized mission trips. Their influence far outweighed my decades of quiet service. "I see," I said quietly. "So the truth matters less than the size of the donation?" Pastor Richards flushed. "That's unfair, Sarah. We're simply waiting for the legal process to clarify the situation before making judgments. The church is supposed to stand for truth and justice," I reminded him, "not neutrality in the face of wrongdoing." "And we will support whatever the courts determine to be true," he assured me. "Until then, we're called to show grace to all involved." "Grace without accountability isn't grace at all," I countered. "It's indifference dressed up as virtue." I walked away before he could respond, my heart heavy, but my resolve strengthened. If even my church community could be swayed by influence and insinuation rather than evidence and principle, then I had even more reason to see this through to its conclusion. The weeks that followed brought a flurry of legal activity. Depositions, evidence reviews, pretrial motions. Stanley Abernathy proved to be every bit as aggressive as Patricia had warned, filing motion after motion to dismiss charges, suppress evidence, and question my credibility. But as the trial date approached, something unexpected happened. The weighty district attorney called Patricia to arrange a meeting. When I arrived at her office, Patricia was reviewing a thick document, her expression thoughtful. "They've offered a new plea deal," she explained when I sat down. "And it's significant." "In what way?" "Ethan is willing to plead guilty to all charges if Melissa is granted immunity. He'll accept full responsibility, make complete restitution, and serve whatever sentence the court deems appropriate, as long as Melissa faces no criminal charges." I stared at her, stunned. "He's taking the fall for both of them?" "It appears so. The DA believes Melissa was the driving force behind the fraud, but they're willing to accept Ethan's plea if it guarantees a conviction without the risk and expense of a trial." Why would he do that? I wondered aloud. Protect her at such cost to himself? Patricia shrugged. Love, fear, financial dependence? It's impossible to know his motivation. The question is whether you're comfortable with this resolution. I considered it carefully. Ethan would be held accountable, but Melissa, who had likely orchestrated much of the deception, would walk away without legal consequences. It seemed profoundly unjust. And yet, the thought of a lengthy trial, of seeing my son in a defendant's chair, of having our family's dirty laundry aired in public view, it was exhausting just to contemplate. Perhaps this was the best compromise available in an impossible situation. What happens to Melissa if I reject the deal and insist on trial? If they're both convicted, they'd both face potential jail time, probation, fines, and restitution. They'd have felony records that would impact employment, housing, financial opportunities, essentially, their entire futures. And the children? What happens to Noah and Emma if both parents are convicted? Patricia's expression softened. That depends on the sentencing. With no prior records, it's unlikely both would serve jail time simultaneously. But yes, there would be significant disruption for the children either way. I thought of Noah's drawings of the broken house, of the pain already evident in his young life. Did I want to be responsible for causing him more trauma, more loss? For all my justified anger toward his parents, could I bear to see him suffer for their mistakes? I need time to think, I said finally. How long do I have to decide? The offer is open until Friday, Patricia replied. 3 days. I left her office with the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on me. Justice versus mercy. Accountability versus grace. The abstract principles I had so confidently invoked now collided with the concrete reality of children who would suffer regardless of my decision. Driving home through the familiar streets of Cedar Grove, I found myself turning toward Lake Haven instead. The cottage, or what remained of it, had become a symbol of all that had been lost, all that could still be saved. Perhaps there, among the ruins of one life and the possibility of another, I would find clarity about the path forward. The April afternoon was cool but bright as I pulled into the gravel driveway, now cleared of construction equipment and debris. The contractor had secured the property as ordered, boarding up exposed areas and removing safety hazards, but doing nothing to repair or restore the damage. I unlocked the new front door, a temporary replacement for the antique original that had been discarded, and stepped inside, greeted by the musty smell of abandonment. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed through gaps in the boarded windows, illuminating the partial walls and exposed beams that had once framed my family's history. Moving carefully through the gutted rooms, I tried to see beyond the key destruction to the possibilities that remained. The foundation was still sound, the location still beautiful, the memories still mine, even if the physical artifacts that had contained them were gone. In what had been the kitchen, I sat on an overturned bucket, the only available seat in the empty space, and closed my eyes. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter from decades past. My father teaching me to bake bread at the now demolished counter. My mother singing as she washed dishes in the sink that had been ripped out and discarded. Ethan, small and eager, helping me make pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, those moments were real. They had happened in this space, had shaped who I became, who Ethan became. No amount of demolition could erase that truth. Opening my eyes, I surveyed the destruction with new clarity. What I saw was not just the ruin of a beloved family cottage, but the wreckage left by generational patterns of betrayal and its aftermath. Robert's infidelity had shattered our family 30 years ago. Now Ethan's dishonesty had done the same to his. The cycle would continue unless someone chose a different path. I stood, brushing dust from my clothes, and walked back outside to stand on the weathered dock extending into the tranquil lake. The water lapped gently against the wooden pilings, constant and soothing. Above, a pair of ospreys circled, their piercing cries breaking the silence. Life continuing, as it always does, regardless of human drama and destruction. In that moment of stillness, surrounded by nature's indifferent beauty, I found the answer I'd been seeking. It wasn't about justice versus mercy, accountability versus grace. It was about breaking cycles, about choosing what kind of person, what kind of mother, grandmother, woman I wanted to be in the chapters of life still unwritten. The legal system would determine Ethan and Melissa's fate. My task was to determine my own. Driving back to Cedar Grove as the sun began to set, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. The decision ahead was still difficult, the path forward still uncertain. But for the first time since discovering the betrayal, I felt not just anger and grief, but also the faintest stirring of hope. Hope not for reconciliation. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt, but for transformation. For the possibility that from this painful crucible, something new and unexpectedly beautiful might eventually emerge. For Noah and Emma, for myself, perhaps even someday for Ethan. I reached for my phone at a stoplight, composing a brief text to Patricia. I've made my decision. Let's meet tomorrow morning. The light turned green, and I drove forward into the gathering dusk, ready at last to step from the shadows of the past into whatever future awaited. I arrived at Patricia's office promptly at 9 the next morning, my decision made after a night of reflection that had left me feeling unexpectedly calm. The weight of uncertainty had lifted, replaced by the clarity that comes with knowing your own mind. Patricia greeted me with a concerned smile. "You look better today," she observed as I settled into the chair across from her desk. "More resolved." "I am," I replied simply. "I've decided to accept Ethan's plea deal." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "May I ask what led you to that decision?" I took a moment to gather my thoughts, wanting to articulate the complex reasoning that had crystallized during my visit to the cottage yesterday. "Two things, primarily," I began. "First, Noah and Emma. They're innocent in all this, and they've already lost so much. If both Ethan and Melissa are convicted, the impact on their lives would be devastating." Patricia nodded, her expression softening. "Children are always the greatest casualties in these situations. And second," I continued, "I realize that what I truly want isn't punishment, but accountability and change. If Ethan is willing to take responsibility, even if it's partly to protect Melissa, that's at least a step toward acknowledging what he did." "I understand," Patricia said, meeting my gaze. "But I have conditions that need to be part of any agreement." We spent the next hour outlining my requirements. Complete restitution for all damages to the cottage, formal acknowledgement that I never authorized any loans or renovations, and legally binding agreements preventing either of them from having any control over my finances or property in the future. Most importantly, I insisted that certified copies of all fraudulent documents be provided to Robert and Vanessa Thompson. "Because they should know exactly what their son has done," I explained when Patricia questioned this last condition. "4 years. They've painted me as the difficult one, the unreasonable ex-wife who couldn't move on. It's time they faced reality." The district attorney called Patricia the following day to confirm that Ethan had accepted all conditions. The formal hearing would take place the following Monday, after which the civil proceedings to address restitution would begin. The weekend before the hearing found me restless and anxious. On an impulse, I called Dot. "Are you busy today? I'm thinking of doing something a bit different." 2 hours later, we were sitting in the waiting area of Transformations, the trendiest salon in Cedar Grove. When my name was called, I handed the stylist a magazine photo of a sophisticated shoulder-length cut with layers and side-swept bangs. "And have you ever considered going a bit lighter?" she asked. "Not blonde, but maybe some caramel highlights to warm up your natural color?" I met my own eyes in the mirror, the same tired, predictable reflection I'd seen every morning for decades. The woman who had always played it safe, who had prioritized practicality over pleasure, duty over desire. Yes, I decided impulsively. Let's do the highlights too. 3 hours later, I emerged from the salon transformed. My hair fell in soft, face-framing layers that made my cheekbones more prominent, my eyes brighter. The subtle highlights caught. The afternoon sunlight, adding dimension and warmth to my natural brown. "Sarah Thompson," Dot declared, circling me with an admiring expression. "You look absolutely stunning." For the first time in years, I felt it too, not just acceptable or presentable, but genuinely attractive. The woman in the salon mirror had looked confident, vibrant, years younger than her actual age. She had looked like someone with adventures still ahead of her, not just memories behind. That evening at Antonio's, Cedar Grove's most upscale restaurant, I was acutely aware of heads turning in our direction. David Winters, Helen's son and a successful real estate developer, stopped by our table, genuine surprise in his expression. "Sarah? Sarah Thompson? You look different. Great, but different." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a flush rise to my cheeks. "Just needed a change." "Change suits you," he said with a warm smile before returning to his own table. Well, Dot murmured, eyes sparkling with amusement. David Winters certainly noticed the new you. Monday arrived with gray skies and a steady drizzle. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit, adding my mother's pearl necklace. Professional, dignified, appropriate for witnessing my son plead guilty to crimes against me. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate, and therefore more intimidating. I sat in the row behind the prosecutor's table, keeping my gaze fixed straight ahead as people filed in. When Ethan entered with his attorney, I allowed myself one direct look, just long enough to register his haggard appearance, the dark circles under his eyes, the unfamiliar pallor of his skin. The proceedings moved swiftly. The judge entered, the charges were read, and Ethan stood to enter his plea. "Guilty, Your Honor," he said, his voice so quiet the judge asked him to repeat himself. The judge delivered the sentence, 6 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation, complete restitution for all damages and fraudulent withdrawals, 200 hours of community service, a permanent ban on any involvement with my financial affairs or property. As he was led away, Ethan turned in my direction, his eyes searching for mine. I met his gaze steadily, neither accusatory nor forgiving, simply present and unwavering. For a brief moment, I thought I saw genuine regret in his expression, not just for being caught, but for the irreparable damage he had caused. Outside, the courtroom, Melissa approached, her face tear-streaked. "Sarah," she began, her voice barely audible. "I just want to say—" "Not here," I interrupted quietly. "Not now." She bit her lip. "Can I call you? To discuss the children? They miss you terribly." I hesitated, thinking of Noah's drawings, of Emma's smile, of all that had been lost in this wasteland of adult betrayal and consequence. "You can email me," I said finally. We'll arrange something appropriate. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was an opening, a narrow bridge over the chasm that now existed between us, just wide enough for two small children to cross safely. The next morning, after a peaceful night's sleep, I made a decision that had been forming since the court hearing. It was time to return to Lake Haven Cottage. Not to wallow in the destruction, but to begin the process of reclamation and renewal. With notebook in hand, I began to sketch ideas for restoration. Not a return to exactly what had been, that was impossible now, but a thoughtful reimagining that honored the cottage's history while creating something new and purposeful. The kitchen, once the heart of the home, would remain centrally located, but with a more efficient layout. The open shelving my grandfather had built could be recreated using salvaged wood. Modern appliances would replace the ancient ones, but in styles that complemented the cottage's rustic character. As I moved through the gutted rooms making notes, I felt a growing sense of excitement replace the grief. This project, reclaiming and restoring Lake Haven Cottage, could be a symbol of my own restoration, a tangible representation of resilience and renewal. I was so absorbed in my planning that I didn't hear the car approaching until a knock came at the open front door. Looking up, I was startled to see David Winters standing in the entrance, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said apologetically. "My mother mentioned you might be up here today, and I was in the area for a property assessment. I thought I might offer my professional opinion if you're interested." We spent the next hour walking through the cottage together, David making professional observations about structural elements, potential improvements, and likely costs. His expertise was evident but never condescending, his suggestions thoughtful rather than prescriptive. "The restitution from the court case should cover most of the basic restoration," I explained as we concluded our tour on the lakeside deck. "But I'm considering some additional improvements that would make the place more sustainable long-term." "Such as?" David inquired, genuine interest in his expression. "Better insulation for year-round use, solar panels to reduce electricity. Costs. Perhaps a small addition that could serve as a private office or studio." I gestured toward the view of the lake. "I'm thinking about spending more time here, not just summer weekends." As David left, promising to send some contractor recommendations, I returned to my notebook with renewed energy. For the first time since discovering Ethan's betrayal, I was looking forward rather than backward, planning for possibilities rather than managing damage. The days that followed brought a flurry of activity as I embraced this new direction. I interviewed contractors for the cottage restoration, ultimately selecting a woman-owned firm specializing in historic renovations. Teresa Jimenez, the owner, immediately grasped my vision of honoring the cottage's character while improving its functionality. "We can salvage more than you might think," she assured me during our initial consultation. "Those original hardwood floors can be restored even where they've been partially removed. The stone from the fireplace has been set aside. We can reconstruct it using the same materials. And I know a craftsman who can replicate your grandfather's built-in bookshelves based on the photographs you provided." I signed the contract. That day, a sense of rightness settling over me as plans for reclamation took concrete form. Work would begin the following week, with completion estimated in 4 months, just in time for late summer evenings on the restored lakeside deck. During this time, I maintained carefully supervised visits with Noah and Emma at neutral locations like the Children's Museum or public park. The first such meeting was awkward and tense, with Melissa hovering anxiously and the children uncertain how to navigate the changed dynamics. But by the third visit, a new pattern emerged. Melissa would drop the children off and return 2 hours later, giving us uninterrupted time together. Noah's initial reserve melted away as we built elaborate sandcastles or fed ducks at the park pond. Emma, always more demonstrative, covered my face with sticky kisses and demanded uppy at every opportunity. They never asked about their father directly, though Noah occasionally mentioned Daddy being away for work. I didn't correct. This fiction, recognizing it as an age-appropriate explanation for a situation too complex for a 6-year-old to fully comprehend. Meanwhile, an unexpected opportunity arose when David mentioned that the community center project he was developing in Pine Ridge needed an educational consultant. Someone to oversee the design of learning spaces for children and adults, he explained during one of our now regular coffee meetings. Given your background as a principal, you'd be perfect for the role. The prospect of meaningful work, of applying my professional expertise to a community project, was deeply appealing. I agreed to a part-time consulting position, which soon expanded as my contributions were recognized and valued. As spring gave way to early summer, the cottage restoration progressed steadily. Walls were rebuilt, floors refinished, windows replaced with energy-efficient versions that maintained the original styling. The kitchen began to take shape, modern in function but traditional in appearance, with open shelving recreated from salvaged wood and a farmhouse sink similar to the original. Each weekend, I drove up to check on progress, and often stayed overnight in the small bedroom that had been completed first at my request. These solitary evenings at the lake became a cherished ritual, a glass of wine on the partially rebuilt deck, watching the sunset while planning the next day's work. The community center project flourished as well, with my educational designs receiving enthusiastic support from local officials and potential users. David suggested the possibility of a full-time position once the center opened, a role that would allow me to develop and oversee programming for learners of all ages. It would mean relocating to Pine Ridge, he pointed out during one of our planning sessions, but with the cottage nearly restored. The idea took hold immediately. Moving to Pine Ridge permanently would mean leaving Cedar Grove, the community I'd called home for over 30 years. But it would also mean purpose, meaningful work, a fresh start in a place unburdened by painful histories and gossipy neighbors. By midsummer, the cottage restoration was nearing completion. The exterior had been repainted in the original gray, with blue shutters, but with subtle improvements, a slightly expanded deck, energy-efficient windows, solar panels discreetly placed on the rear roof slope. Inside, the rooms were taking shape, familiar in layout but refreshed in function and appearance. The kitchen, the space whose unauthorized rearrangement had first alerted me to Melissa's boundary violations, was now my own creation. Granite. Countertops replaced the worn formica. New appliances stood where the ancient ones had been. Open shelving displayed my carefully curated collection of pottery and glassware. Everything arranged precisely as I preferred, a tangible symbol of reclaimed autonomy. On the day the final inspection was completed and the contractors departed, I stood alone in the renovated cottage, absorbing the transformation. The space felt both familiar and new, a perfect metaphor for this chapter of my life. The bones of the past remained, providing structure and foundation, but the expression was entirely fresh. My vision, my choices, my future. That evening, I sat on the rebuilt deck watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. A loon called from the distant shore, its haunting cry echoing across the water. In my hand, I held the new set of keys Teresa had presented during our final walkthrough, symbolic keys to my new life. Tomorrow I would begin moving my belongings from Cedar Grove to Lake Haven. I would submit my formal application for the full-time position at the community center. I would continue building a relationship with my grandchildren that existed independently of their parents' choices. I would move forward, step by deliberate step, into a future I was creating on my own terms. The locks had been changed, literally and metaphorically. The space, my space, was arranged exactly as I wanted it. And for the first time in decades, I felt not just acceptance or resignation about my life, but genuine excitement about what lay ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.